Thanks very much for coming. It's really nice to see all of you. So yeah, my name's Sam. I'm basically a record producer, which under that umbrella term, that basically means that I'm a studio owner, recording engineer, mixing engineer, mastering engineer, kind of like all those kind of terms under one roof. And I own a place called Lower Lane Studios, which is in Fenton. I've been there since 2014 and pretty much specialise in like alt rock and metal, but do have like experience through like many different genres. Like you guys, I was a student once. I studied at Newcastle College and Staffordshire Uni. So about 8 to 9 years ago, I was sitting right here as a student, and then I left that, left my degree, finished my degree, and then set up a studio and work now, luckily full time in music, which is really nice. So, has anyone heard of the studio before or heard any of the bands that I work with? That's nice. It just makes me feel a bit less like a stranger, so that's quite cool. Also, I think like the talk today is probably going to be, it's more like a business talk essentially. Like it's probably not got that much to do with recording. So like whatever you guys are trying to get into, it's probably the talk is a bit more geared towards like how to go it alone, how to be self-employed, like and the journey it takes to, you know, get from point A to point B. So whatever your kind of like aims are or like what you want to try and achieve, like this is, you can kind of take away from this like whatever you want. It's about a journey of like how I kind of like took a derelict building, turned it into a studio and then turned that into a job in a kind of a weird climate and a very strange place to set up a studio in, you know, Stoke-on-Trent. So we're going to talk about like that sort of stuff. So also, if you want to keep it quite conversational, like jump in at any time you've got questions, like I would rather keep it more like a chat, because like as much as I would love to just stand here and talk about myself for like a good hour, I think it might be a little bit stale. So feel free to jump in at any time, like any questions you've got. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. So Lower Lane Studios opened back in 2014 now with very little money, very little experience and very little equipment. It was just kind of like a pipe dream of mine, and in hindsight when I look back on it, it was a very interesting time, and I think the culmination of being young, being very naive, very ambitious, all kind of made sense at the time to just do this wild thing. But when I look back on it, it was, you know, kind of strange, kind of reckless, and it could have quite easily not worked out, but I'm so glad that I just gave it a shot. And basically, Lower Lane Studios started out as a small, abandoned, derelict pop bank building. Obviously, Stoke-on-Trent's got a huge history of just derelict pop bank buildings, so I managed to snap up one of those and set up a studio from there. It was very run down when I found it, but I could tell immediately that it had huge potential, and one of those reasons was when you walk in, this is, if you see here, this is the live room, and you'll notice that the ceiling's quite high. So the ceiling kind of goes up in an apex like this, and that was like one of the big plus points for me. So out of all the places that I looked at, and I was searching for a studio for months and months, that was one of the reasons that I settled there, because I found a location that had like a little bit of promise. And it wasn't set up with any huge amount of money, it wasn't set up with a bank loan, there was no investors, it was just renovated by me, my grandfather, my friends, my family. Everyone chipped in, everyone helped to just basically set it up from the ground up. And now it's home to bands like Graphic Nature, Black Coast, Out of Love, Science, Clay Lake, Take Breath, Grey Wave, John Darley, tons of bands, so many bands from Stoke. If you listen to any local music, if you listen to BBC Introducing from Stoke, there's always going to be like a massive percentage of stuff that I've worked on in the local area, but I do a lot of stuff from the Midlands, I do stuff from down south. People come from Manchester, Liverpool, people come all over to come and record in Fenton, of all places, which I think is kind of cool. And typically I work on about 200 to 250 songs a year, something like that. So that could be recording, mixing, mastering, whatever it is, but typically work on something around there. Cool. So I just want to talk a little bit about my history then and how this all kind of came about in the first place. So it all kind of started around 2010, so that's like 12, 13 years ago, and that was right after leaving college. So for me, like, I've always been a musician, I've always played guitar, I've played guitar since about 14, I've always played in bands, but there was something about recording that just clicked with me. Like, it was always my, like, it was always my favourite part about like being in a band. I kind of enjoyed playing the shows, enjoyed writing the music, but when we went to the studio, that was the thing that like really resonated with me. So even when I think we went to the studio for the first time, I was about 16, and something just really clicked. I don't know if you guys have had that experience yet with whatever it may be, but whether it's like being on stage or being in the studio, like maybe something's kind of clicked with me. But for me, I could tell straight away, even at 16, 17, like I love being in the studio more than anywhere, and it just felt like such a impossible thing. But I kind of saw that guy there, like sitting, behind the glass with the desk and all the, the gadgets and things that I didn't understand at the time. That just kind of felt right to me. So like many of you guys, if you've got any sort of like home recording setup, it probably doesn't look too far off something like this, or maybe you've even got a better setup than this by now. But that's what I started with. So I just started with a one microphone. I had an 8-channel interface. I had like a simple iMac and a pair of speakers. And this is the setup that I had in my dad's garage. So it had like no heating, no water, no Wi-Fi. And I just basically like decided that I was going to do this thing. And I took whatever little equipment I had, and all I had at the time was, I had a book called Pro Tools 101, and it was just a big, thick textbook that was super boring, super dry. And I used to drive up to my dad's, so I used to live in Fenton, and he lived in Leek, which is about 15 miles away. And I used to drive there every day. He wasn't even home, I didn't even have a key to the house, and I used to just go into the shed, and I just flipped through page after page of Pro Tools 101. I did that all summer and just basically taught myself how to record. Because like at the time, I get my timeline a bit confused, but when I went to college initially, I tried to sign up to what I thought was the music tech course, but I think because there wasn't many people who were interested in that, they actually just put me onto a music performance course. So when I wanted to learn how to start recording music, but I ended up spending 2 years just playing like blues solos for 64 bars and like learning things that I had, to be honest, no interest in whatsoever. And I remember playing in a band and we had to learn we had to become a tribute band, and we learned like 5 Blondie songs. And the entire time I'm like sitting there thinking, I just want to get in the studio. And they had a studio there, but I think we only ever went in there like 3 times. So after 2 years at college, I was completely like disenfranchised with the whole education thing, and I just decided I want to record. I'm going to just give it a go. I'm going to start learning it myself. I'm not going to go and spend money at university yet. I'm going to go and give it a go. And the reason for this is because over the summer, so the last summer that I was at college, we went and made a record with a guy called Matt O'Grady. And we went all the way down to Surrey. And this guy at the time was working with some like really high profile stuff in our genre. So he's working with like bands like You Me at 6, Def Havana, Architects, if you've ever heard of any of those guys. So this is about 10 years ago. And when I went and made a record with Matt, I realised that he was actually making records with really high profile people in a very, very, very simple studio. So he had a studio in the basement of his mum's house. It was just a tiny little spot like my dad's place, and I just kind of went down there and I thought, for the first time it felt like it maybe was achievable. So I don't know if you guys obviously got access to the studios here, and they're probably worth, hundreds of thousands of pounds, and you probably walk in there and think that that's what you need to get started, but that's what I thought back then. And then when we went to make a record with this guy Matt, I realised that actually he kind of started with a very, very simple thing and was working his way up through the industry and doing really well. So it kind of inspired me to just give it a go. So at around 18, 19, I decided to take an indefinite gap year. So I was off, just kind of on this journey on my own for a couple of years. So I set up in my dad's garage and with one microphone started making records. And the important thing to remember as well is this little location here, as simple as that is, I actually made quite a few recordings in there and actually made money from that little tiny setup. So I'll just give you a quick play of something that I did in that room all those years ago. Now it's not incredibly impressive or anything, but it just gives you a little insight into like where I was at the time. So I was working with a guy, like an acoustic singer-songwriter, and he wanted to do these songs that I had no way of really recording. I only had one microphone, and he wanted to do drums and bass and harmonies and guitars. And I could have quite easily said like, oh, I'm not set up to do this, so I'm not going to bother. But we just found a way to do it. So we would record the guitar, we'd record the vocal, we'd record the bass separately, and then all the drums, we would do them one drum at a time. We'd do the kick drum, then we do the snare drum, then we do the cymbals, then we do claps, and we just layer it up with just this one microphone. Super cheap MXL mic that was about £90 or something like that. But I'll just give you a little example of what that was back then. So yeah, you can see that 11 years ago this was.
I'm strange like that I drive you away.
You get the gist of the kind of thing it is. I'll skip ahead to where
Like some can fall.
So at this point we've got a little bit of guitar.
But at this game, all I was looking for.
So this was just, taking the floor tom, dampening it, and then recording the cymbal separately, recording the bass separately, and just layering it up with what we had. So yeah, not my best work, but it was a start, and that was like where it all kind of kicked off for me. So like, with that project, that was never supposed to be a paid project or anything, it was just a friend's band, and it kind of like went better than we were both expecting. And after that session was done, he like offered me some money for it, and I started thinking, hey, this is kind of cool. I started to make a little bit of money on the side, so I started recording more stuff like that, and then the demand kind of rose. So then people would come to me and say, hey, can you record this, this band? I remember recording a band, and the guy showed up, and he had 2 kick drums, and he had like 6 toms, and this time I had like an 8-channel interface and about 6 microphones, and I was like, do you need to use both of those kick drums? And he was like, yes, I absolutely need to use both of those. I was like, you do know that I only have 8 microphones? But it's like, you just find a way of doing it. Like in those early days, I would just take on like whatever projects I could get my hands on, and you just have to find a way of making it work, because the alternative is, you say no, and then you're not going to develop any skills. So I had a really, really great, kind of 12 months, 18 months making records out of that tiny little space, and it really gave me the start and that drive to kind of do it. So fast forward a couple of years. So if we move to what I like to think of as the portable days. So this was a period of my life between about 2012 to 2013. So after taking my 2 years gap year, so I don't know if you guys came straight from college or what, but basically I had 2 years gap year. I was trying to make it in the music industry. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just making these little demos, and it was going okay. I was doing little bits, but I wasn't really satisfied with how the rest of my life was going. I had a really rubbish job, basically just working in a museum cafe, serving coffee to old women and people on tours, and that side of my life wasn't going so well. And I think the final straw was when I went for an interview at Farm Foods and I got rejected, and I was like, I'm so unemployable. And at the time, it just made me panic a little bit, because Harry is my brother-in-law, and I'm married to his sister, and we've been together since before I even started doing this. So she's 2 years younger than me. So she was about to go to Keele to become a nurse, and at the time I had a job washing dishes, and I couldn't even get a job at Farm Foods, and I had this pipe dream of making recordings. And I think the timeline of it started to scare me a little bit, and I was thinking she's got this real career prospect in front of her, and I've kind of not really got much at at the moment, and not got much going on for me. So that was when I made the decision, okay, let's go to university. So I signed up for a course at Newcastle College / Staffs Uni, where I started to get my degree. So that was a great thing. I'm glad that I waited to go to university, because I think by the time I actually got there, I was very, very serious about wanting to learn, and all I wanted out of that was education. I didn't want to go to parties, I didn't want to move away and go to university to meet people. I just kind of wanted the degree at the end of the day. So I basically got stuck in, and I was just a real spot, and I just kind of kept my head down and worked. But at the same time, I never stopped making records. So what I did is at this point, I'd outgrown the little studio in my dad's shed. I think I was getting under their feet a little bit. He kind of politely suggested that I maybe move on. So at the time then, I basically created a portable rig that I could move around the city. So what I did at that time is I just had a collection of maybe 8 to 12 microphones. By this point, you just get paid for a session, you get a few more little mics, and by this point I'd started to move around, and we're using church halls, community centres, friends' bedrooms, we're using practice rooms, we're using at one point my nan's living room when she was on holiday, which turned out to be a bit of a mistake, but anywhere that we could get our hands on. I had a little room for very briefly at the side of the music shop. They let me record drums there until I painted the floor, and the fumes stunk the whole shop out, and he had to cancel his drum lessons, and I got kicked out of there. So at this time I was just pushing, trying to find anything I could, any little availability I could. I was even using the studios at college, at Newcastle College. I was even doing sessions, paid sessions at night there, so I'd book the studio out, and friends would come in, and we'd do the guitar part, we'd do the bass part. So just making use of any space that I could. But yeah, this was an amazing time. I was building up more of a following. I was building up loads of experience, starting to get a little bit more confident in my skills, and just reinvesting every time, just constantly buying equipment. And I think at this time, I think this is when people started to think I was a little bit crazy, because I was taking my student loan, and you get your first student loan, and everyone shows up in new clothes, and they start financing a car and all this kind of stuff. And I was buying vintage microphones and just stockpiling them. I had absolutely no use for them whatsoever, but I just had this stack of boxes in my room, all the way to the ceiling. And I was buying really boring stuff as well. I was buying microphone stands, XLR leads. I remember on eBay just finding a stack of old XLR leads, 12 XLR leads, and just having those in my room. And it just kind of, I think a lot of people found that crazy, but for me, I knew eventually I was going to need them, but it just didn't quite know when. So I was investing in the business, way before the business became a reality. So back in 2012, I didn't open the studio until 2014, 2015. So it's I was just stockpiling all this gear. But I had an amazing time through this period of my life, taking stuff around in my old car, and we'd go anywhere and make records, just kind of making it happen on a very, very DIY level. I'll just show you some clips of that as well. So this is one place that ended up being really awesome. So it's the Newcastle Christian Fellowship, and this was a place where my nan taught the Sunday school. So what we used to do is go to this church. They'd let us go there in the week, because no one was really using the church. And we'd set up a little control room in the attic space of the church, and then we'd run XLR leads all the way downstairs, and there was this huge, there was this huge hall downstairs that was probably 4 or 5 times the size of this room, but really big, really open, really reflective, and it was such an amazing place to make records. It's just a shame, kind of looking back, that I didn't quite know what I had there. I didn't know how to harness that sound. But one really cool thing about that is I made maybe 4 or 5 different recordings there, and then years later, I think probably in 2017, 2018, when the studio had been open for a while, I actually went back there and made a record, made a drum sample pack as well. So like with the knowledge that I'd gained over the years, like I decided to go back to kind of where I started and made a little recording with a band from Birmingham. So I might just give you a quick blast of that as well, just to kind of show you kind of like, you know, that you don't need like a fancy studio or like a designated acoustic space. You can find like amazing acoustic spaces like anywhere. So I'll just give you a quick play of that. So the drum sound that comes in at the start here is all in that church. There's no like artificial reverb or anything like that. It's all like completely natural and it sounds absolutely amazing. For like huge snare sound, we had like mics like halfway up the stairs and all this kind of stuff, and it was just like a really fun experience to go back there after all those years, like with some proper equipment and like some actual know-how of how to capture that. And like I say, it also made like a drum sample pack while I was there as well, so people could actually like download that and use that in their own productions, which I thought was quite cool. So yeah, by this point, 2012, 2013, been making records like, you know, on a very DIY level, just learning as I go. And the great thing about that as well is like, you know, not like getting stuck into something like that without the know-how immediately is like, it's quite nice when someone comes to you and you don't know how to do it. Like you really figure out how to do something fast when someone is like putting pressure on you. So I remember the first time that I started recording like multi-track drums, and you know, the first couple of times I did it was okay, and then when I got a bad drummer, I suddenly realised like, oh, I need to learn how to edit like immediately. So with the whole band there, I'm just like trying to figure out how to edit these drums. And I tell you what, you learn fast on the job. Like that's one thing I will say about this is like, you will learn how to find the answer when there's like 5 people standing there watching you do it and like waiting to move on with the session. I'm just like, oh, just let me tidy up this little bit quickly. Okay, cool. So we'll move on to like the beginning of, you know, the real journey here. So full disclosure, I did get my lucky break in 2014. So after doing this for sort of 3 years, trying to find my way, I actually won a competition, like a Dragon's Den style competition, and I won £5,000. So like that sounds amazing, that sounds really good, and it was, and that is where things started to change for me. So basically I was studying at Newcastle College, and then this Aspire housing group had come in with this concept that they wanted to do. So they kind of came in with these leaflets, and my lecturer at the time, Simon, handed it to me, and I was only just young enough to do it because I was actually a university student. But it was like a Dragon's Den style thing, like, hey, do you have the next best, greatest idea? Like, we could help you do this. And I think because the cutoff was like 21, and I was like almost 22. Like, I was like 2 months away from being too old to enter this thing. But I entered it, I went for a chat, I told them that I'd been making records, I told them that I wanted to open a premises, I told them that what the scope would be if I was to get a premises, and I actually won, which was amazing. So that was like the start of this whole journey really. It gave me that incentive to like keep going, to find a property, to really make it happen. But yeah, so obviously we're talking today about like hard work and graft and stuff like that, but obviously I've got to be totally like transparent and say that yeah, I did get a lucky break. But there is something to say about luck. Is I think luck is a very real thing, but you've got to be in a position to take advantage of that luck. So I don't really think that there's any, like for instance, like I don't know what position you guys are in now, but if I walked in and I gave you, well, I think 5,000 in today's money is probably like 10,000, right? So if I came in and said, hey, here's £10,000, like how quickly you think that you would spend that? Like if you were starting from absolute zero, So the thing is like 5,000 for me back then was life changing, but none of that money went towards equipment or anything like that. All it did is it secured the property for 6 months. I spent all of that money on, I had to get a toilet, I had to get a sink, I had to change the electrics, I had to put in flooring, I had to put in a door between the control room and the live room, and then I put the rest on rent, and it gave me enough money to be in business for 6 months. That's all I had, and I knew I had a 6-month window to try and make it work. But if I hadn't have spent 3 years investing in the business before that, 5,000 wouldn't have even cut it. There's no way that 5,000 would have been enough for me to kick that off from the ground up. So if I would have had to buy a computer, an interface, speakers, enough microphones to record a band, all the XLR leads, you know, the XLR loom to connect the two rooms together, that money would have been spent in an instant. I would have had 1 month's rent and then I would have failed. So does that make a bit of sense? Like, yes, you can create your own luck up to a point, but when that opportunity comes, you've got to be ready to strike on that, if that makes sense. So anything that you're trying to do in the industry, moments of opportunity and luck will come up, but you've got to be ready to take them. I'd already been making records for 3 years at this point. I had a small client base, I had all the equipment ready to go, and if I didn't have those things, there's no way that 5,000 would have been enough to kind of see me through. But that was enough for me to kind of find this old building, and it was a totally unloved, totally derelict. It's a really, really strange old building. Like, this part of the building is from before 1900, and then this is like a more modern extension. And this is the part that was like really drew me to opening a studio here, because it's got the highest ceilings. Also, it just so happens to be detached as well, which is like the absolute. I think if I hadn't have found this building and found a building that was detached, again, £5,000 would have not been enough, because there's no way that I could have afforded the soundproofing. So I recently had an issue where I thought that I was going to have to, retrofit some soundproofing. And then when I actually started to get quotes for it, it was tens and tens and tens of thousands of pounds. We're talking like 50, 60, 70,000 pounds to soundproof the studio that I have now. So there's no way that I could have done it. So I did get very lucky with this, but it took about 4, 5, 6 months to find the property. I was searching and searching and searching. I went and looked at, 15, 20 different properties. And it just so happens that I ended up finding this because my uncle plays darts at the pub that's just kind of down the road from here. And he was telling someone about the fact that I was like trying to find a property and I couldn't find one. And when I managed to get hold of the landlord's number, she didn't even know that they owned this building. It had been like totally forgotten about, totally derelict. And I managed to find this woman's number, and I was like, hey, I want to rent this property. And she was like, oh, like what? Like where's that? And I had to show her where it was. I was like, it's this one, and this guy says that you own it. And she didn't even know that they owned it. And there'd been a guy squatting there for 10 years, and he wasn't very happy when I let her know that she did in fact own it and that I wanted it. So he had to get all his machinery out of there, and he was like using it for storage. So he wasn't too happy. But yeah, does that make a bit of sense up till now? So it didn't kind of come overnight, but like when I look back on it, it kind of makes sense. You kind of start out with this little idea, and I think by the time I found this place, I'd probably had maybe 4 or 5 sort of failed attempts at this. So I'd set up with my dad's, that had kind of gone wrong. I set up in my nan's living room when they were on holiday, that went very wrong. I'd set up on the side of a music shop, got kicked out of there, set up in my band's rehearsal space, had a falling out with the other band, they kicked me out of there. So I'm trying all the time. I think that's the key, like knockback after knockback. And even up till this point, there's been many signs from the universe that maybe I should stop, but I never ever stopped. I just kept going. I just had one knockback and then just keep looking for the next opportunity until one finally stuck, basically. And that ended up being this property right here. So Let's move on to the next part. Now, I didn't really know what else to call this slide because it was, I started trying to explain it in the title, but basically around 2014, 2015 was like one of the most chaotic periods of my life ever. And it's kind of hard to explain it all, but essentially I got the keys to the studio in the summer. I renovated it all summer. Then I went back to university to finish my degree. So I was in my last year at university at the same time as opening the business. At the same time as that, I actually got a job lecturing. So I was such a nerd, and I basically knew Pro Tools inside out because I've been using it for years. And Newcastle College had a lecturer leave like very, very last minute. So like at the exact same time as all this other stuff happening, I got offered a lecturing job to cover like one lecture a week. But to do the lecturing job, I had to do teacher training. So I was doing a teacher training course, I was teaching, I was working part-time, I was doing my dissertation, I was opening a business, and the whole thing was so chaotic. And I think like, to be honest with you, many people would quit at this point because it was every minute of my like existence then was taken up by some form of work. I was either at uni, I'd typically be at university in the day, then I'd go to recording at night, or I'd be teaching in the day and go to recording at night, and I was working every minute of every day, 7 days a week, and it was so unhealthy and so stressful. And I think like, not many things, break me, but this was a particularly like tough period. But I'm only telling you this, I'm not trying to come across like, like, look what I went through. But what I'm trying to say is this was a very, very important time because the studio did not feel like it was going to happen. Like when the studio opened it opened September 2014, and I had like a very, very small window of success. So, people hear that there's a new studio, you offer deals. A few people came in, I was doing, a few recording projects for about 2 or 3 months, let's say up till Christmas time. And then completely nothing, absolutely nothing. I remember speaking to my dad at the time, and he was asking how it was all going. And I was like, I haven't had a single email or inquiry for 2 months. Not one person contacted me for 2 complete months. And I felt like at that time, I was like, there's no way this can work, it can't work. But through this period, finished at university and just hung on long enough, just enough to kind of like, it felt like at the time, I think of it as like a snowball effect. And I don't know if you've ever been faced with something that just feels so impossible, but I felt like I was pushing against this thing so hard for so many years and so many months. And eventually, once it started going, touch wood, it just hasn't stopped since then. So the first like 6 months of the studio were terrible. The first 12 months of the studio were not good. First 18 months we started to get a bit better, but really the studio was open for 2.5, 3 years until it started to actually become, even at that point, like part-time. So like what's been really interesting about this whole thing, like I did this talk at Staffs as well, and I added this line in, but it actually took in total, I didn't go full-time as a music producer for 7 years. So from 2010 to 2017, that's how long it took me to become to have a full-time income. And when we talk about full-time income, I'm not talking about 50, 60, 70,000 pounds a year. It took me 7 years to get to a point where I could rent a terraced house. Like that's like how long it took to do it. But touch wood, it just has continued to grow year on year on year. And the studio's been open now for almost 9 years, and like the last 6 months or a year has been the best it's ever been, and I'm hoping that just continues. But I just want to put into perspective the timeline of this. So like from inception to actually making it my full-time job, so a point where I left lecturing, I left my part-time job and I started focusing on this solely. Was 7 years, which is absolutely crazy, really, because I think a lot of people would have probably said that, you know, after that amount of time, maybe it's not going to happen for you. But I just kind of kept pushing against it, and you know, hopefully that resonates with you in some way. Like maybe there's something that you want to do that seems like pretty unachievable, but just look at the big picture and just. I think if you're trying to get a career in the music industry, you have definitely signed up for quite a challenge there in itself. So I think if you're ready to put the work in, like it's absolutely doable, but you have to be really dedicated, really committed. I was literally on the way here, I was listening to a podcast, and it was, of all people, it was Seth Rogen talking to the podcast called Diary of a CEO, and it's the young guy from Dragon's Den. So it was like Seth Rogen, guy from Dragon's Den. But Seth Rogen was saying that all the people he knows that are successful, not the most talented people, not the most lucky people, they're just people who did not stop, did not quit. And that's why I love podcasts so much. I always listen to podcasts because even though you might put that on and think about like, oh, I'll put this light-hearted comedy podcast on featuring Seth Rogen, but you always can find some value in what that person's saying. And I think that's a very common thread. Like anyone who manages to like make it in the entertainment business is just very committed to what they want to do, and stubborn as well. I think is probably another thing, to be honest. So yeah, I'll move on to the next slide in a sec. I've been talking for a little while. Has anyone got any questions so far? There's definitely more to talk about, but is everyone cool? Yeah?
Was university worth it?
Was it worth it? Yes, it was, because I've got a lifetime backup plan career now. So like, if something goes wrong at the studio, like I can go and get another job using my degree, whether that's in music or not. Like, even if I went and worked on a factory, I would get a higher paid job just for having a degree. So yes, it was in, but also I've got like a mixed relationship with education, because almost nobody that studied on my course like went on to do what I do, because they all just kind of like left the course and then we were like, what now? Like, where's my studio? And I was like, well, mine opened last year and is currently failing really badly, but like at least I started it. And I think a lot of the time people just, you shouldn't wait until the end of your education to be pursuing these things, because they're going to take so long. But I learned loads about things that I never knew that I would need. So like, particularly, I learned a lot about acoustics. I learned a lot about, like instrument technology, so like how circuits work and things like that. But in terms of like actually sitting down with a band, making a record for a 5-piece rock band, I learned next to nothing about that at university. But I did learn a lot of other skills. So I definitely enjoyed it, and I think from a networking standpoint it was very good. But I think if there's like a niche thing that you want to do, I think there's no reason why you can't learn that alone, or like you should. If you want to learn about mixing or mastering, like there's every resource out there to go and do that without being at university and without spending any money at university. But like so I'm kind of like on the fence with it. I would have been able to achieve this without university, like definitely. But what would my life have looked like if it failed? I couldn't even get a job at Farm Foods, when I was like 18, 19. But now I'm like very employable because I have a degree. So I always saw it as like my like safety net and like backup plan. But in terms of like straight up education, like how to I was totally fixated. Like I only wanted to record bands. Like I wasn't kind of on the fence. Like, oh, maybe I'll work in film, or maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that. I've known since I was 16 that I just wanted to record rock bands. And in a sense, actually, that is something that I've taken for granted is like knowing what you want to do is very, very fortunate, because I meet so many people who like don't know what they want to do, and I actually feel, with hindsight, very, very, very lucky that I just happen to know, because like my wife now like still is like, she's a really successful nurse, but she still says all the time like, I don't know if I even want to do this, but she's got a fantastic job, you know, like it's really like respectful, you know, job, very important, looks after like loads of amazing people. She works in like learning disabilities, and but she's like, I don't know if I want to do this. But I've just always somehow known, like, just like an absolute laser focus, like kind of obsessive in a way. So I think, so yeah, like university was definitely worth it for sure, but for reasons that you might not think, you know. All good?
Do you manage your work-life balance better now than you did back then? Or, like,
Yeah,
you do
sometimes.
sometimes.
Yeah,
Get a
sometimes.
little bit carried away. Huh?
I've got a slide on that later.
Hmm.
I've got some bits to talk about work-life balance for sure. Much better now. I think it like was really poor, then not so bad while I was getting busier. Then it just blindsided me, and as the studio got busier and busier and busier, it got to a point where it was horrendous, and then you'll reach like a breaking point with it, and then like it's kind of fallen back down to decent. But it's still very difficult, you know.
Yeah.
It's but I think, you know, work-life balance. If you like self-employed, like even if I was a plumber, I think like getting work-life balance when you're in charge of your own schedule is very difficult. You know, if you work 9 to 5, it's a bit easier to balance that, I think. But yeah, well, but we'll talk about it a bit more later. I've got a bit on that. Were you going to ask a question?
I was going to say, what's your biggest lesson or regret, and what did you enjoy the most?
Oh God, I don't know. Ask me at the end. Ask me again at the end. It's too. I don't know. It's too broad.
Yeah.
Biggest regret. I don't know. I don't know about regrets, because I think like ultimately like the journey's so complicated that I think like even the regrets like led to somewhere else. So it's like you just have to take it all in your stride really, and there's things that I would maybe have done differently, but who knows like what that would have led to. But I don't know. There's so much. Let me have a little think about that. I'll try and think about something a bit more finite. But yeah, cool. So I've got the next slide's like a little bit about like how I've actually grew the business. So we spoke about like how I got that initial building. So now we're talking about a period here of like the last 8 years, like how I turned it from an idea to actually like a successful business. And a little bit of advice for you guys, mostly surrounding like any sort of self-employment. So pretty much my like one piece of advice, or like this is what really worked for me, is I worked, I invested, I renovated, I grew, and I repeated, and I just repeated that cycle over and over and over and over again. I always put the lion's share of the profit back into the property. So like if I, 70%, 80% of what I earned always went back into investing in the future. So like new pieces of equipment, better microphones, better acoustics for the property, even things that make the building more comfortable. So one of the biggest investments that I've made recently is putting aircon in all the rooms, replacing the floors so they're more comfortable, making sure the studio is like not drafty, but just buying more and more stuff, more amps, more guitars, more pedals, just whatever I felt like at the time would bring in more clients. So things that essentially I could put on Instagram and say, hey, I've just had this new thing, and that might lead to a conversation with a band that I've never met before because they like the look of that amp or that drum, and it just gives me more tools for more situations. So, I started out with one drum kit, with one snare drum, and then I had 5, and then I had 8 snare drums, and then I had, started out with one amp, and then eventually over the years you end up with 5, 6, 7, 8 different amps, different cabs, and it's just about having building a business that has enough kind of variety there for many different musicians. So instead of just being like, hey, I've got this one thing and I can get this one sound, I've got like a variety of things. But that's what I always did. I always kept my overheads at home very low. I've got a really old car. I don't spend a lot of money on clothes. You know, we had a very, very sensible house for a long time. We didn't spend a lot of money there. And I would just keep putting money into the business. And that way the business grew every year. And also, like, something I've been talking about a lot is like, people, like, there's an amazing like network around the studio now, because people came, they spent money, and I made the studio better. So every time people came to the studio, they go, oh, this is new, that's new. I'm like, yeah, well, you know, you essentially paid for that. It's kind of like the studio was built, you know, it was built by me, but it was built and funded by the community. So it's like every time a band comes to the studio, if they come to the studio like twice a year, I would hope that the studio had improved every single time that they kind of come in, because it gives people like ownership of that property and it makes them feel proud to see you doing better every time, because they're getting more for their money essentially. So if I keep improving the property, they're going to be happy to keep coming back time and time again. So again, through this time, networking, hustling, learning, developing, and repeat. So what I've always found is with this is you get to a point where you learn a new skill, and then you plateau for a little bit, and then you work really hard to get to the next level, and you plateau there for a little bit, and then you go to the next level and you plateau, and you go through these cycles of comfort and discomfort. So you have moments where you feel like you really don't know what you're doing, and then you work really hard to get to that next level, and then you think, oh, I kind of got this, I think my records sound pretty good, and then you start to have this voice creep in and say, this isn't good enough, the cymbals don't sound good enough, the kick drum doesn't sound good enough, and you start to chip away at little bits like that. So you're constantly growing, like never stop learning. So we'll move on now to like little bits of advice. So this goes like into any sort of thing that you want to do. One thing I would say to people is, you know, don't wait, just start. Like whatever it is you want to do, even if you know nothing about it, just start. You can't get good at it until you just do it. So you've got to get stuck in. It's going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to feel out of your depth. But like whatever idea it is that you've got, anything that you want to do in the industry, just start. Send that email. Make yourself uncomfortable. Get the book. Get the subscription to Mix with the Masters or whatever. But start to do it. If it's something that you want to do, just start now, because it's going to take a long time. There's no point in beating around the bush. There's no point waiting for someone to give you the answers. University doesn't have the answers. You know, I can't give you the answers. You've got to go and just figure it out, find it out for yourself. Also, I would say, in terms of building the business, I would say that above all else, word of mouth is everything. People talk about, ranking really highly on Google and SEO, and why didn't you get flyers made, and hey, why didn't you have business cards, and blah, blah, blah. Time and time and time again, my work comes from word of mouth every single time. It's like, it doesn't matter what I do, it doesn't matter if I do promoted posts on Instagram, Facebook, it never works. The only thing that works is word of mouth in my particular industry. If you're doing something different, more related to sales, that might be different. But in terms of like creating a product for a band, it needs to be vouched for by another person, and there's nothing better than two bands that I work with, like going out on tour together, and you just know, like what's really great now is like, say a band that I work with, like Black Coast, I'll see that they're going out on tour with a new band, and I start to think to myself, like, I'm gonna get an email from that band, because that Black Coast in particular, they're so like vocal about how much they love the studio and how happy they are, and you just know that the people that they interact with and they see, that is going to lead to something. And in the beginning, that's where all of my work came from and has continued to be that way. I've tried everything, I've put money into so many different things, but ultimately you've got to just be the very best at your job as you can be, and other people will. They'll do it for you, they'll do the marketing for you basically. But it's a very long process that way. So another piece of advice for me is definitely that slow and steady wins the race. So I've seen plenty of people, plenty of producers kind of absolutely race past me in terms of like their career in the beginning, because they're sending cold call emails to people, they're offering discounts, they're like, hey, insert band name here, I think your music's really great, how about we make a record together? And I've even had, bands sitting in the studio behind me and they'll go, oh, such and such has just sent me an email, and I'm like, the etiquette of that in the studio world, is so awful, isn't it? Like, they see that I'm recording a band, and then they send an email and say like, hey, why don't you come and do your next one with me? And it just doesn't work. Like, I've seen so many examples of those people's careers, like, they blossom and then it leads to nothing because they're not nurturing that relationship. So like, whatever it is that you guys want to go out and do, in my opinion, it's the real relationships that will stand the test of time. It might take a little bit longer to get going, but I really don't think the whole like cold calling and like hard sell, for me personally, I've never seen that kind of work. But yeah, so that's how it's kind of always worked for me. Word of mouth, just do your very best, be very present in the job, what you're doing, go the extra mile. Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to say is don't be a jack of all trades. So something that I found when I was starting out, the studio wasn't doing well. So obviously everyone's got the next best, greatest idea, and my nan was like this all the time, like, why don't you go and speak to the local schools and start recording the orchestras, and why don't you offer guitar lessons? You play guitar, why don't you just start teaching guitar, and why don't you do this and why don't you do that? I'm like, because I only want to record rock bands. So how is me recording a school orchestra going to lead to more work recording rock bands? And I think sometimes you've got to be very, very, very stubborn. And for me personally, I've only ever recorded, mixed, and mastered music. That's it. I don't teach guitar on the side. I don't do rehearsals. I don't offer video productions. I don't do birthday experiences. I don't do hen parties. I don't do any of that. I record, mix, and master music for essentially guitar-based music. I don't record rap. I don't record country. I record rock music because that's what I like and that's what I want to do. And me recording, rap music or, recording voiceover work or editing podcasts, it isn't going to lead to the thing that I want, is it? So I think sometimes those things can feel like a really great idea, but nothing turns me off more. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but if I was a band and I was looking for a studio and I was on that studio's website and I saw that they also offered hen party experiences, does that feel like the kind of credible, cool place that you would want to make your record as a band or an artist? Or if they are quite happy to take money for a birthday party experience for kids, does that kind of feel like the place you would want to then go and make a really credible artistic piece of music? That's always kind of conflicted with me. So in the beginning it's very tempting to do these things to try and bolster your income, but I think ultimately long term, is that a good idea? What's that going to do for your credibility as an artist? So with that thing, I really dug my heels in with that, and I never did anything outside of that. And I've got a network of people that I could, if for instance, I keep bringing up rap, but it's not that I've got anything against rap, it's just not a genre that I understand anything about. So it wouldn't be credible of me to take those people's money and do a really poor job of that when I know that there's multiple studios in Stoke-on-Trent that can do a much better job than me, and also that then bolsters relationships between other studios and stops strange conflict of, you know, interest, and it just boosts the whole city. So if someone gets in touch with me and says, hey, I want to like do 2 hours in the studio rapping over this beat, I say, get in touch with Mitch, and I send him his contact, and he does a really good job of it, and then I don't have to butcher it. And I think that ultimately, again, long term, in the beginning, you know, the first 6 months of the studio, 12 months of the studio, I tell you, it's very tempting to take those kinds of projects. You know, very tempting to take on a Hindu project if it came up, or recording somebody singing an Adele cover. But ultimately, it's not what I wanted to do, and it's not what my heroes did when they were coming up either. So all the people that I aspire to be like, they would never have done that. So I'm not going to do that either. So I think sometimes that's where people go wrong. I've seen so many studios open, and they've got so much more money than me, and the studio is kitted out better than I could ever afford. But when you go onto the website and it says that they offer these kind of services, it just completely puts me off. That's just me personally. Take that however you want. Okay, next point I just wanted to make is don't be complacent and never stop pushing forward. You know, it's like I'm at a point now where the business is a little bit more stable. I've got like a wide client base, but it doesn't mean that I should take my foot off the gas and just cruise through for the next 10 years. Like, I've had like a more, like the last 12 to 6 months of the studio have been the best they've ever been, and that's because I never stopped striving for that next thing. I could quite easily now probably never post on Instagram again, never post on Facebook again, never do any outreach to new bands. I've probably at this point got enough old bands to just kind of keep me going for the next 5-10 years, but that isn't what I want to do. I've got other aspirations. I want to keep pushing forward, keep striving for the next thing. I want the studio to grow. I want my skills to grow. So I think that's something else I see in self-employment in general and people who work in the music industry is there's no, compared to a job, like a 9-to-5 job that you apply for, it's a very, like, it's two completely different things. I think like working for yourself is like, it's a bit more of like a lifestyle than it is a job. So it's never over, and that might be something that like you either thrive under that pressure or you don't. So personally, I really like that. So I know that I can never just put work to the back of my mind. I can't just show up and have a bad day. I can't just not turn up to work. I can't just have a sick day. I can't just be late. I'm the only person who represents that business, and the standard has to stay high at all times. So I think if you're the kind of person who wants like the immediate reward of applying for a job, so say you see a job advertised, you apply for that job, you go for the interview, you get the job, that's it, isn't it? Like that's the pinnacle of your that's where you celebrate, isn't it? So like you get the job, you celebrate, you know what kind of money you're going to be on for the next year. Hopefully you keep that job for a long time, you can maybe get a little bit more money in the future, but really there's no incentive to kind of keep going. Whereas like my work could go away tomorrow. Like I could have a cancellation. Back in like November, December, I had an entire album got cancelled and pushed into the new year. So suddenly I've got a window of 3 weeks where I'm just not going to work unless I get up, pick myself up, advertise that space, and try and get some work wherever I can, basically. So the difference is with this kind of industry and anything that you want to do, if you are thinking of setting something up or being self-employed or whatever, you've got to know that it's never going to be over. You can't just have an off day, you can't just have an off month. Like, I'm not saying that everyone in 9-to-5s and stuff just don't care about the job, that's not true, but like, essentially, unless you're really, really, really underperforming, you're not going to be sacked or anything like that. But if I have a really off day with a band, they might never come back. And if that happens again and again and again and again, they're going to go around saying like, oh, we're not bothering with that anymore, like, we're not going there anymore, like the last time we went there was terrible. But touch wood, like that very, very, very rarely happens. because I really thrive under that pressure. I like not knowing that I don't have any job security. I know that maybe some people don't like that, but I quite like it. I like to look in the diary and see that, like, so right now at this moment, I only have a job until July. Like, that's it. Like, if I don't get anything for August, then that's it, isn't it? Job over. But I'm confident that I will get something for August and September, and next year I'll have a full year of work ahead of me. But I quite like that sometimes, you know? It's like the uncertainty, like, breeds, like,
Incentive.
yeah, incentives to do it, yeah, and just passion and drive, and like it keeps me going. It gives me something to worry about and to stress over. I guess but that's just something that I guess is my personality. That's what I like. Some people wouldn't like that level of uncertainty, because that's what comes up a lot. People say like, oh, aren't you worried about, you know, this and that, and like, how do you find it if people cancel? And it's like, well, you know, you never know. Sometimes, like, I've had situations where people have cancelled and it's felt at the time like a really big blow, but it's actually led to a better scenario. So like having last minute free time, like, you know, occasionally has actually led to me securing a better project than the one that got cancelled, because, like, you know, that's just the universe, isn't it? It's like you don't really know. But I quite like that not knowing all the time. It's not always a bad thing, and you do get used to it. Like, in the beginning it was a little bit more stressful, but I think after like nearly 10 years, like, I'm kind of a bit more used to it. So I'll just again, just talking of growth, so this idea of reinvesting, if you can see there, this is what the live room of the studio looked like in 2015 versus 2022. So just nice bit of steady growth. It's like, it's not night and day, but it's one of those things. It's just every year, and that didn't all happen overnight. You know, it was like 1 year I might have changed the electrics, and then the year after that we changed the acoustics, and then the year after that maybe we changed the, you know, the decor, the painting. It's just like steady growth. You know, same thing as if, like, you know, you own a house or something. You're just constantly renovating, constantly pushing forward. I just wanted to touch very briefly, I don't know if I want to talk about this for very long, but the COVID years and all the setbacks, obviously wasn't a fantastic time for business. Was out of work for, you know, a good 3 or 4 months initially, and then through the period, like the winter period, was out of work for a little bit longer again. But it's one of those things that you just have to prepare for in business. You never quite know what's coming. So like a good example is, like, I didn't know that COVID was coming, but I was prepared for it because at the same time we were trying to get a mortgage. So like I was saying, I only have a job until July. If you're trying to get a mortgage, you've got to make sure that you've got some backup. Like, I need to know that, like, for me, I personally like to try and have I need to have about 6 months of buffer at this point. So I like to know that no matter what, if I break my back tomorrow and I can't go to work, the studio will have about a period of about 6 months where all the bills are covered and I'm not going to go out of business. Or if my career starts to really tank, I've got 6 months to reinvent myself, go and find a different job. But it would take, you know, that's how long it would take for me to, like, if I just stop working today, you know, roughly speaking. So I didn't know that COVID was coming, but I was weirdly prepared for it because I'd already been kind of doing a bit of doomsday prepping essentially on the build up to that, sort of like 2 years before that. So we made it through that okay, and then actually, like, the sort of year or 18 months after that was probably the busiest period I've ever had in my life, because the influx of people wanting to get back to normal life and wanting to have, you know, those experiences again was really positive. So we won't dwell on, like, the negative side of it. It wasn't brilliant. There was one experience which was really negative, which is where the police showed up and tried to arrest me at one point for breaking lockdown rules, but I wasn't actually breaking lockdown rules. It was just they didn't know what the rules were, which obviously, you know, you will have seen a million examples of that, but I think the rules were so unclear at one point that I was I was only recording one member of a band at a time. That's all I was like allowed to do, as long as we were in a different room, which again is impossible because we have to come through the same doorway, use the same toilet, use the same sink. But essentially, if I could put the drummer in one room, I could be in the other, and technically that was okay. But yeah, so one day, the police showed up, and I think at the time it was like a £10,000 fine. And I had to show them so much paperwork to kind of get them to go away. But that was a scary thing. So let's move on. I don't want to talk about COVID. So something that we mentioned earlier, I just want to talk a little bit about burnout and workaholism. So this is a very real thing, and you guys might have seen this, but I think the music industry and Instagram really idolizes workaholism, and it's something that I fell victim to for many years. So you see this all the time, and it's been present all through the 60s, 70s, especially when you're watching music documentaries. You see all these huge bands, and like your Fleetwood Macs and things like that. I remember reading the Fleetwood Mac book where the guy Ken, can't remember his second name, guy produced it called Ken somebody, and he was talking about how he was basically working 24 hours a day on Fleetwood Mac's Rumours because the band all liked to record at different times. So the bass player was like a real morning person, then like the singers would come in the afternoon, and then like Lindsey Buckingham, the guitar player, he was like a real night owl, so he'd want to be there at like 2, 3 in the morning. And they were like, in the studio for 3-4 months. He was literally sleeping under the desk, but it's so glorified that to the point where like that's what I thought was expected of me, and that's what bands thought I was supposed to do as well. So like in the early days, it felt like a great idea, like a session's going really well. Yeah, sure, I'll stay over 2-3 hours. Should we get some beers? Like, we'll get some beers, we'll get some pizza. Why don't we just stay all night? We'll record all night. It sounds like such a great idea, doesn't it? Until the next day rolls around and then that's completely wasted. Or like, what I found is, like everybody that you work with, rightly so, in a way, thinks that they are the most important thing in the world at that moment in time. Like, we're in the studio, we're recording our record, you work for us, like, hey man, like, could we not just stay an hour or two over? Like, we've got this little idea, or we haven't quite finished this, like, doesn't sound like a big deal, does it? An hour here, an hour there. But when those hours start to stack up and you're doing that 5-6 days in a row, you could be working another 10-15 hours that week for free. Plus, what happens is all those extra hours, they start to compound, don't they? So you might do that a few nights a week with one band, and like they really appreciate it at that at the time. But then say a brand new band comes in the next day. So say you did this Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Say you stay 2 hours over every night till Wednesday. Roll around to Thursday, you're absolutely shattered, and you've got a fresh-faced, new band comes in, they're really excited, and you're just completely depleted by that point. So like, doing one favour for one band over here seems like a really nice thing to do at the time, but actually you're just taking that from another person who deserves your full attention. So it took me a little while to get this balance right. And another thing that I realised is, I was working 7 days a week, week in, week out. Wasn't uncommon for me to work 3 weeks in a row, 4 weeks in a row, no days off, working late nights. And I kind of came to realise a few years back that nobody else in any industry works 7 days a week. Doctors don't work 7 days a week, the police don't work 7 days a week. Doesn't matter how important that job is, nobody works 7 days a week because it's impossible to sustain it. It's so tiring. And take it from me, it only leads to one thing, and that is burnout. And I don't know if ever you guys have experienced anything that like relates to burnout, but it's such an unexplainable thing. And it's like, it is very real. Like, it's just you hit a point where you just cannot go on anymore. And your body just says, enough. And that point for me was, it was about, I think it was like September 20, want to say September 2020, so like that period between the two COVID lockdowns. Basically come out of COVID, gone absolutely insane, just working 7 days a week, 7 days a week. And I ended up working something like 35 days in a row, and then went straight to Scotland. And basically, as soon as I got to Scotland, I realised that I was not very well at all. And what I'd been doing is, I'd been ignoring a problem with my wisdom tooth, and it got really infected. But because I was so hell-bent on working, I wouldn't take time off work to go and deal with like my health issue. I just put it off. And then as soon as my body relaxed, that's when everything just went wrong. And this like infection was so bad that I basically just ruined my entire holiday. And it was like, it was a massive wake-up call. I just thought, this has got to stop, you know. No one else does this. And you just, you know, there's so much pressure from, you know, Instagram, but it's not reality. There's so many people out there, like, we're working 14 hours a day, 16 hours a day, like we're making these hits, we're doing this, we're doing that. But it's just not realistic. So after that, I decided I've got to get my work-life balance under control. I've got to get some hobbies outside of music. So, because my life was so like one-dimensional at that point. So you were talking about like, you know, how do you get it under control? I didn't see how out of control it was getting. It just kind of crept up because I was just so hell-bent on doing it. And then eventually my body was like, you can't keep going like this. So a couple of ways in which I did that is I had to get hobbies outside of music. So for a long time I still played music as well as recorded it, but quite often that meant being in the studio all day, in the studio all night. You know, my band would be rehearsing, so you're just listening to drums, you know, all day long, so tiring. So I was like, I have to get another hobby. So I started, you know, running, hiking, going to the gym, cooking, anything that I could do that was just outside of music, you know, listening to podcasts, audiobooks, things that just weren't like cymbals, guitars, basses, like screaming vocals, just anything that was outside of my world. So I started to really like discover, you know, new things that I didn't like do at the time, which was really nice. I've always enjoyed traveling as well, so that's something I've always done a lot of. But what I did, because my client base was so used to me, you know, doing an hour extra, doing a couple of hours extra, what I had to start doing for a while there is I would book a gym class, like half an hour after the session was supposed to end. So I'd be like, I have to go, you know, I have to go. And that was such a really positive thing to have something at the end of the day. So if the session was supposed to run till 6, I'd book a gym class at 6:30. I'd say, I can't stay tonight, guys, I've got to go to this gym class. I paid for it, I've got to go. And that was such a really positive thing for me because I started to get used to saying no to people, which I'd found very hard in the past. I'd just say yes, 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 stay late, come early, do a weekend, whatever it was. So I kind of got used to that, and then also it just kind of just demonstrated to people that I did have some boundaries in my life, and like there were other things outside of recording and outside of business. So yeah, I just wanted to like, and also, you know, I'm here today, I'm rabbiting on about just recording. You know, I'm not that one-dimensional, I do have a life outside of recording. It takes up a lot of my week for sure, but there are other things that I love. So I'll just show you a couple of those things. This is a curry that I was very proud of making the other week. That's something I really enjoy doing. Love travelling. That's me and the boys up, I think that's Scarfell Pike when we did the Three Peaks. This is the Scotland trip where I got super ill, so I had to go to the hospital the morning after that because I woke up like sweating like crazy, and then that's my little dog there. So you know, I do things outside recording as well, but for a period there, I maybe didn't do that much stuff outside of recording, to be honest. I was pretty obsessive, which I think to some degree you have to be. If there's something you want to do, I think you do have to be a little bit obsessive. Okay, so one of the last things I just want to talk to you about is, this is more geared towards the guys in here who specifically want to get into recording. If you want to be in my position and, you know, hopefully it doesn't take as long, but if you want to be where I am in 5-6 years, this is a slide I want to call "The T-Boy is Dead." So how many times have you guys heard the story, the typical engineering success story of you go to a London studio, you bang on the door, you say, hey, let me just hang around and make some tea for a little bit, and then eventually I might just become a really successful producer. Like, have you guys heard that sort of story before, that career path, as it were? Well, that is pretty rare these days. Very, very rare, I should say. Things are changing across the industry massively, or did change 10 years ago. That certainly wasn't an option for me 10 years back. I think things are very, very different now. Everyone's route into the industry, of course, is very different. But to be honest, with records being cheaper and easier to make than ever before, like, really has anyone got money for an intern, a T-boy, people hanging around the studio? We're not really making those kind of records these days, apart from the very, very select few studios potentially in London, where there is budget to have extra people on the session. 99% of the time, it's people like me in a tiny little studio, and we're doing the pre-production, we're doing the writing with the band, we're doing the engineering, the mixing, the mastering, all in-house by one person. It's very rare that you see these days that there's a budget for multiple people. It used to be that all these jobs were broken up into like multiple different stages, but 90% of my work is all done by me. Very occasionally, something might go off to mix by someone else, and then occasionally someone else will master the record, but bands do not have the budget for that kind of thing. So I tried this, when I was back like in my early days of university. I sent off emails like, hey, can I just come and hang out at the studio? And it's only now, in hindsight, having a studio of my own, I just wouldn't want anyone hanging around the studio, to be perfectly honest. You've got to have a little bit more to offer than making some tea, basically. I think we're in a period now where people can be so much more skilled than just kind of hanging around the session and making some tea. The amount of emails I get where people say like, hey, could I just come and hang out at the studio, I'll make some tea, I'll pack up some XLRs for you. And I'm like, I know your heart is in the right place, I totally get that, but I think nowadays that's so off the money, because packing up some stands and XLRs is a 10-minute job. Bands can make their own tea, it's like, it's really not, I totally get where people are coming from, but you've got to have more to offer. So what I want to try and say today is, like, I'll give you some insight into what I think that is. So first of all, if someone ever gets in touch with me, the first thing I'm going to say is, send me something you have recorded. If you haven't picked up a microphone and recorded something, there is no point in coming to the studio. Everyone has the ability to get a cheap microphone and a cheap interface and just record something. I don't care how rubbish that is, but if you haven't had the incentive to just give it a go like I did 11, 12 years ago with absolutely no understanding of what I'm doing, you're not ready to come to the studio. Does that make a bit of sense? I know that's like a little harsh, but that's the first thing I say to people if they get in touch, like, hey, could I just come and hang out? No, you can't come and just hang out. It's like, what skills do you have? What can you actually do? Because there's no reason why you can't learn these things from YouTube, essentially. You don't even have to be at university to know how to do these things. So what I would like to say is, my personal opinion is, what are some of the routes into producing? Obviously, you could go it alone. I did that. It took a really long time. It was really hard. If I was to have my time again, you asked about regrets. If I was to have my time again, I would try and get a mentor, if I could get one. I would try my best to study under someone else. I've been mentoring a guy here, Johnny. He's essentially my T-boy. But I've been mentoring Johnny for about 2 years, and his career trajectory is going so much faster than mine was after 2 years, because all the things I did wrong, I can see him about to do, and I just say, hey, just do it this way. This is how you want to do it. This is how you approach this situation. He can come to me and say, I've got a band who haven't paid in 3 months. What do I do? And I've got the answer to that. Whereas I had to go through all these situations, all these little road bumps, all along the way, all character forming, all fun, sure, but I think potentially, you know, my career after 10 years would be far beyond where it is now if I would have had the right mentor. So how do you go about getting someone like that? I think genuinely nowadays you've got to have more of an entry-level skill set, because it's so easy to do. Like I did back when I told you about reading the Pro Tools 101. So like things are very different now. There's so many more resources to learn these skills. Back then I had a book. You know, YouTube was just kind of kicking off, but there wasn't anywhere near the amount of information online. I used to get most of my information from like forum pages, like the Andy Sneap forum or like Gear Sluts or stuff like that. Just like a long thread of text, kind of similar to Reddit. Just a really awful way of trying to learn these things, filled with bad opinions and misinformation. So it was a very, very different time to try and learn these things. My personal opinion is, if you want to get into the studio, try and find a skill that is likely to be outsourced by someone like myself. So for me personally, things that would actually help me is not tidying up some XLRs. If you can do basic tracking on Pro Tools or Logic, so if you can do you know, some actual recording, or I want drum editing, vocal tuning, mix preparation, or if you're very good with like post-production. So drum editing, you guys familiar with the concept of drum editing? So for those who aren't, like what Johnny does at the studio for me is, when I track a drummer in the live room, as soon as that's finished, I send those raw files upstairs to Johnny. He edits that into like a perfect performance. He might clip together multiple takes to make a really good performance. That process probably takes 45 minutes to an hour, something like that. And that saves the band time and money. So if we're doing 5 drum tracks in a day, you know, a good 3.5 to 4 hours of that time of an 8-hour session will be taken up by me editing those drums if I didn't have an external drum editor. So it means that we can get more tracks done per day. There's no time wasted in the studio while the band is sitting around while you edit drums, and it means that the session is geared more to creativity. So that has been a massive, massive thing for me, and is something that I guarantee most producers in my position are going to want. So if you want a route into the studio, number one for me is approach a producer and say, I know how to edit drums. The second would be vocal tuning. Get very, very, very good at vocal tuning, because again, it takes time. It's very boring for the client to watch. It's also very taboo to do it in front of the client, so people might not want you to tune their vocal even though it desperately needs it. So it's like, it's one thing that people like myself love to outsource. And if you can provide these services, you don't even need to be in person. You can do this kind of stuff remotely, but it's going to get you to have a relationship with a producer. It might lead to relationships with multiple producers, and then instead of the old school method where the producer doesn't show up and the T-boy gets called in to assist, the modern approach to that would be they have a session that they want you to come and assist on, and then that for me seems to be the most common approach these days. So if you wanted to kind of get into that world, I would say that these skills are much, much, much more appealing to someone like myself. So if someone sent me an email and say, hey, I'm looking to get into the studio, I've got experience with Pro Tools, Logic, I'm good at drum editing, vocal tuning, I would definitely be having a conversation with that person. Or I would have done before I had like an in-house assistant. But that is the first thing that I kind of said to Johnny when he wanted to come and work with me. It's like, well, what can you actually do? You know, what skills do you actually have? Because there's no reason why you can't learn these things. You don't need to learn these on the job. You can sit there and learn these like on a laptop, watching YouTube videos. That all the information is there now. Does that make a bit of sense? Yeah.
When you send the files up to Johnny, do you ever have a situation where he says, actually, you need to do another take on this, or do you always know that you've got the best performance ready
Yeah.
to send it on?
Yeah, I wouldn't send it up until I knew that we had it, because typically I tend to record the drums in sections anyway. So like we do the verse, then the chorus, then the bridge, and so yeah, it would be next to perfect before even going to edit, and then it would be a case of just that final adjustment. Because a lot of the music I work on, you know, everyone's got different opinions, but like a lot of the music I work on is very quantized. You know, things have to be very meticulous. So like the performance will be fantastic anyway. You know, it's probably been performed like to the very best of that person's ability, and then it will be sent to edit, which will just be that final 5-10%. It's just a process that you kind of have to go through, especially in like metal. Not so much in like more alt rock genres, but like in metal, it's like a process that pretty much has to be done, and it's very boring. So it's like, you know, having someone to outsource that to has been brilliant for me, and is like I say, it's the number one thing that I would look for now if someone like wanted to start working in the studio. Cool. Everyone good? Sweet. So I just want to talk a little bit about resources. So these are some of my favourite places that I get, like, that I always stay up to date with. So we have Control Room, first of all. That is it's like a paid Facebook group. It's like a $5 a month. But there's about 1,000 people in there, and some of the producers in there are like incredibly successful, essentially. People that I would never have had access to, I can now pick the brains of. So I don't know what kind of stuff you guys are into, but like, you know, I've had conversations about audio in there with people like Dan Corneff, who's produced like Paramore, and people like that. And it's like, I've got no business talking to Dan Corneff about audio. Like, he's a, you know, absolute like huge producer. But like, that's a Facebook group that's run by a guy called Ramesh, who's worked with like Motorhead, Bring Me the Horizon, bands like that. And he kind of like brought all these people together. It's just a Facebook community. It's a really cool place to like come and learn and get advice. And there's some really, really high profile people there that you can kind of gain mentorship from. So if you're kind of like looking to get into this sort of world, you can ask for advice in there, and like they'll give you good, solid advice. We've got Mix with the Masters, which is like a subscription service that you might want to look at. They've got some free content. It's all about like top level mixers, people who are working on huge records that you know, you can deconstruct the mix and watch what they're doing. We've got Nail the Mix, which is very similar, except you can download the raw stems. So again, another subscription program. It's geared more towards like rock and metal, but you can essentially download the stems of a project, and then they do a monthly video where you watch the actual mixer deconstruct how they mix that project when you have access to the raw files, which is really cool. We've got the URM podcast. Again, it's just a production podcast. It's you know, amazing way of getting insight into this world. It's just like really good guests on there. We've got Tape Notes, which is artists will come on and deconstruct how they put together songs. So it talks about like you know, mixing, writing. It's a fantastic podcast. Song Exploder, very, very similar. And then more on the business side of things, we've got Six Figure Home Studio. That's more of like a business podcast that's geared towards creatives. So they often talk to producers, they talk to filmmakers, they talk to photographers, anyone in the like under the freelance kind of umbrella. So it talks about how you can have like a really successful business. And that looks a little bit more into like the numbers and like the strategies of like how to run a business. That's really cool. And then Working Class Audio, just another podcast, like features like people like myself, but just obviously much more high profile. So just want to move on quickly to, these are just a few of my recent success stories, which I just wanted to share. Like, all of these things have happened in the last 6 months, which, like I was saying, is a fantastic thing for me. I know I've been doing this a long time, but to have regular kind of Radio 1 plays, we managed to get a track featured on Netflix. These kind of moments really keep you going after a long time in the industry, like trying to get somewhere. Like I say, the last sort of 6 to 12 months have been probably the strongest yet, and I like to think that the next 6 months and the next 12 months will be even better than that. But like, this kind of stuff wasn't happening in the beginning. It still feels amazing to like hear your music, coming through like a national radio station. It's like an amazing thing. But it's taken a long time to get here. So this kind of stuff did not happen 10 years ago, but it seems to be that in the last year or so it's happening more and more often. So I just feel confident that hopefully it continues to go that way. But yeah, enough about me. So yeah, the future, genuinely, I think this could actually still only be the beginning, believe it or not. I think, it's been like a 10-year path to get to this point. But I just want to keep going, and I hope that like I can continue to work with bigger and bigger bands. And another thing that personally I've really enjoyed coming back and doing more with education. I really hope that I can give a little bit more back to education in the next couple of years, because I benefited from it a lot. And like, it's been really nice to come back and kind of reflect on the journey so far. It's kind of been quite surprising, to see actually how long that's been. I think it felt like 5 minutes since I was at university and sitting here where you guys are, like just sort of daydreaming about maybe having a studio one day. But I'm really proud to come back and say that actually I did do it, and I hope to do more and more education stuff. So if you guys have found this like informative in any way, then just ask your lecturers to bring me back, and I'll gladly come and do more stuff. But just reach out and just hopefully it was useful in some way. So enough about myself. I say, I hope that was beneficial to you in some way. I hope you got something from it. I'd definitely love to answer any questions if you guys have got any if you want any careers advice, or you're struggling with any decisions at the moment. I'd love to. But yeah, thanks so much for listening. It's been really fun to do, so appreciate it. But yeah, if there's any questions, then let's do it. It's all right. Cool.
Yeah, so I was just wondering about your spending habits on new gear really. Do you put it in a pool and get big purchases, or do you just tend to buy little things that could make a big difference in the end?
It's normally bit by bit throughout the year. So kind of you have a good month, and then you see I've got maybe I've got 1,000 over this month. Pay myself a set amount every month, and once that's taken care of, then the business account, if that's looking decent, then I'll be okay, someone might come in with a pedal or an amp that I like the sound of, and I think, that would be a great thing to have for the studio. So I might just throughout the year buy small bits, and then typically around about this time of year, when you get towards the end of the tax year, is a good time to buy stuff. So this time last year is when I had all the aircon fitted. So I was did well through the year, saw what I had left, and basically I was well, it's either invest it in the property or give it to the government. So got aircon. So that was this time last year, and then I'm going through that process at the moment, just but sorting out any repairs that need to be done, because you're better off getting it all done before you do tax bill, basically. Yeah. But yeah, it's just bit by bit, just keep investing. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Do you have a bucket list of bands that you would like to record?
Yeah, definitely, but again, just feels so unattainable. So it's kind of if it was to ever happen, I think I always have people on my radar that are seem doable, seems achievable, and then obviously you have the the dream ones, which they seem unachievable, but you just don't know. Like you've got to like stay in the game long enough to see, right? But I always keep an eye and an ear like close to the ground, especially like in the local area. Anyone who's coming up, and like I don't feel too scared of like reaching out to people now, because I guess like I have like some credibility, so I can be like, hey, I did this. Like, you know, I think in the early days it's very hard to do that. I think now you can be like, hey, I worked with this band that you guys have played with. Like, typically there's someone in the network of bands that you might know. But yeah, I don't know. I've got some like, you know, obviously people that I idolise that just, well, I almost wouldn't want to, because like I'd be too starstruck to do. You know, imagine if you got like a call from like Bon Iver or Phoebe Bridgers or something. It's like I wouldn't even. I'd have to say no. I'd have to say no because I just couldn't. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't feel confident enough to like do like my hero level stuff. I think, but that's just like imposter syndrome, isn't it? Like I feel like I couldn't possibly do it. But there's been situations where I've definitely felt nervous about doing a project. Like I remember the first time I did like a label project, and you know, I got a call from this band and like, hey, we're such and such, like we're on Sony, and I was like, Sony, like I don't record bands on, I don't record bands on Sony, like I can't deal with that. But then what you find is like you just say yes, and then you meet that person and you realise that they're just you know, like you, and they're totally normal, and that they're flawed musicians just like everybody else, you know? Like, I recorded some really high profile people, and once you settle into the process, you don't feel uncomfortable with being like, hey, you're not playing that quite right, or like you're rushing, or like, hey, you're not hitting that, you're bending that chord out of tune, or like or taking the guitar off someone and being like, hey, try it more like this and passing it back. It's like, you soon settle into it, but it's like, it feels really weird at first when you're working with someone who's like a little bit more known. But yeah. Yeah.
I was just wondering, to what extent do you have like a creative input to like more the creative aspects of the like songwriting and stuff like that?
It's totally dependent on what the band is looking for or the artist. Like it's a complete sliding scale. Like some people, and this isn't my preferred way, but some people they just want an engineer. They're like, we've booked the studio, we've booked you, now press record. This is the way it goes. This is the guitar I'm using. This is the amp I'm using. Like just press record and that's it. And that's not my preferred way of working. And then it goes all the way to the other end of the spectrum where there's a couple of bands that I work with really, really closely where the process is typically that they don't ever really finish a song alone anymore. Where like they'll just come to the studio with ideas and the song is born in the studio. So those are like my favourite sessions where you know, the band is still writing the music, but it's very collaborative, and they'll come in with a handful of ideas, and everyone's ego is just left at the door. Best idea wins. You know, it doesn't matter who comes up with it. It's just like we come out with the best possible song, no matter who comes up with the idea. And that's the best. So that it's not every project is like that, but when you get those ones, they're fantastic. Like, oh yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
You mentioned about the money side of things and having problems there throughout like COVID and things like that. But since you've sort of become more established, do you account for everything yourself, or do you hire someone else to do accounting for you?
I'm just getting an accountant for the new tax year, so it's something that I want to do. I've always done it myself up to this point, but I'm hitting a point now where like the studio is very well equipped at this point, and I don't want to keep investing in equipment unless it's like important now. So like I've kind of, it's taken a long time to get here, but I'm happy with where the studio's at, and because I don't own the property, I don't want to spend any more money there. So I'm gonna get an accountant this year to like try and take more money home, without feeling like I need to keep kind of offsetting that tax bill against equipment. But yeah, it's pretty easy to do. Like if you're working for yourself, it's just essentially money comes in, and then some things are expenses, so you just deduct those, and then whatever's left over is profit, and then you pay tax on the profit. So yeah, for me, you know, expenses are like the equipment and fixing and repairing equipment, you know, all the energy bills and things like that. So it's very similar to like just the things that you would spend money on at home, really, gas and electric, and that's the highest one basically. So yeah, it's pretty easy to do, but there's some accounting tricks that like I don't understand that I'm sure I'll learn about in the next couple of years. So yeah. Yeah.
Do you ever see yourself outgrowing Mobile Lane?
Yeah, I'd love to. I would love to. I kind of have like two dreams, and it's just whether that ever becomes reality or not. Like I could see it going two ways. Like I would love to outgrow it to the point where I had to upsize into a bigger facility that could then house like multiple studios. So I would love to have a studio where like there was, you know, at least 2 studios where you could have like multiple engineers and then have like rehearsals and things as well, and be more of a hub for the local scene. But I also have a dream where I would love to have like a residential studio out in the countryside, but again it's just very, very, very difficult, you know. But then this felt impossible, so I don't know. I think maybe I need to set my target on that and then see if we can maybe achieve that in 10 more years. But I don't know. It is very hard. It's when you start looking at actually buying a property and building a studio, like a room within a room studio. It starts to get into the sort of hundreds of thousands. And I mean, I live in Tunstall, so it's not like that's not quite on my radar at the moment, you know. But you never know. I would love to. I've really enjoyed having like Johnny training underneath me and like mentoring him. It's been really like rewarding to go through that process, and I would love to like continue that. And we've spoken about like, you know, when he's at a point where he's successful, then we could potentially keep that chain going, and we could then mentor somebody and kind of keep growing that scene. But again, it's these things that, you know, these plans, they take years to kind of come to fruition, really.
Yeah.
Like I say, it's he's 2 years into his career now, and even though it's going fast, he's still very much part-time and you know, earning bits, but not quite at the equivalent of like, you know, say having like a normal part-time job at the moment. And that's 2 years in, so I think it's just like knowing like what your base level commitment might be to something like this. I think that's if you went that exact route, you know. I think he knew he knew it'd be a long process.
Yeah.
So it'll probably be at least another year until he's like earning more of a full-time wage, I would say. But still amazing, like still great that he's doing that. So yeah, let's see what the future holds. I'm not stopping yet anyway, definitely not stopping, so we'll see what I can do.
It's just sort of seeing you grow through the different studios, and if it's,
Yeah.
see it continuing.
I do feel like this one's kind of hit its
That's
wall,
what
like,
I'm getting at, yeah.
I do feel like it's sort of hit its maximum potential now.
Yeah.
Because one thing that's very difficult is like when you are just a singular person, that's not a scalable business. So it's like, you know, you can't, like, I'm not a carpet fitter, I can't just have 6 guys going out and fitting carpets for me. Like, people come to the studio specifically to work with me. They're not really booking it for the studio facility. I could be anywhere, you know. So it's difficult because it's a very bespoke thing, and even introducing another person has been met with some resistance at times. You know, people are like, well, we don't want the intern, like we want you, and like,
well, I want Sunday off, so, you know, you're having it, like, he does Sundays, like, so it's tricky, you know, it's tricky. I think it would be very hard to, like, scale it up to more than me and him, and maybe one more, but, yeah, who knows? I do feel like there's potential for growth, for sure, at the moment. I think it could keep going.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, we'll see. Fingers crossed. Yeah, sorry.
Talking about growth, have you ever thought about using your studio and hiring that out for other people to use, or would you not feel comfortable with that?
Yeah, I do. It just tends to be full, to be honest. It like, people have reached out about it in the past, but it tends to, between me and Johnny, we tend to fill it like pretty much like every day. So like he's there now. So like, when I'm not there, he typically is there, and because it's only a small space, like, that's what I mean. If you had like multiple studios, like, it'd be fantastic really to like set a studio up where you know, all of my recording income was like surplus. So like, I would love to set up a studio where the studio and the rehearsal rooms like essentially just pay for the whole running cost, like a baseline income. It's essentially like the same process as being a landlord, but with less like negative connotations attached to it. Or like being a landlord of a studio, you know, that would be fantastic. But again, these things, they're very, they're tricky. And Stoke-on-Trent's a tricky. It's a bit of a double-edged sword. Stoke-on-Trent. It's actually like, I think it's a great place to own a studio and a terrible place to own a studio. It's kind of like the music industry is not based around Stoke-on-Trent, but it is a great place to have a small business because it's cheaper here to run a studio than it is to London, Manchester, and you can kind of be a bit more of a big fish in a small pond here, which is just the route I chose. Like say, like, maybe if I was having my time again, maybe I would have experimented with moving away and having that experience elsewhere, but it's just not what I chose at that time. And then once I was dug in, I just sort of stayed. But I mean, people, you know, quite what I'm noticing at the minute is people are coming from London to Stoke to make records because it's so cheap. I can make a record like a third of the price here compared to like London, so it makes a lot of sense for people to do it that way around. But yeah, so I do it on occasion, but it tends to be just as and when. What are you going to say?
Yeah. Would you advise like young producers, like students who just graduate, to kind of build an image and in terms of focusing on certain styles, certain type of music, learning in depth the kind of what others do? You think that approach might give them more chance to kind of be unique,
Yeah.
be some kind of particular?
I know what you mean. I would absolutely, yeah.
Maybe it's difficult to generalize. Or
No, I would definitely try and get your own unique style, and I would be very adamant about the type of thing that you want to work on. Because if you, like I said earlier, like if you're being like a jack of all trades, then no one really knows what you're about. So if like 1 minute on Instagram you're recording like death metal, and then the next minute you're recording like, you know, R&B, it just doesn't make any sense. Like no one knows like who you are or like what you kind of stand for. So I'd say that like you should kind of niche down where you can, like keep your options open, but like ultimately if your career took off in one direction and it was something that you weren't passionate about because it wasn't authentic to you, then eventually you would burn out and you wouldn't want to do that anymore. So like say if I was really interested in recording rock and metal, but on the side I recorded rap, and then for some fluke my rap career took off and then I ended up recording rap 40 hours a week, I don't think I'd last very long because it isn't what I like or what, and it's two very different jobs, isn't it? Then it's like, you know, recording is kind of boring, you know, like actually physically sitting there by a computer and just pressing record
is pretty like mundane task. It's the other things that excite me. It's actually the creating the music in the style that I like. So if anyone comes to my Instagram or Facebook or something, it's quite clear what I like and what my sensibilities are. So I think it's about being genuine, you know. So like whatever you're most passionate about, then do that. Like don't go where the money is. Go where the passion is. You know, it's I think that's like a key takeaway. Yeah, no worries. Anybody else? No? Cool.
I'd just like to chime in just on the back of the point you made about the competition you won for the Money Dragons Den thing. There is some entrepreneurship prizes and funds at Keele. When they come into my inbox, I do try and put them in the teams. I don't know if you know what the exact name of it is. No, I don't. There is. Yeah, it's something to do with entrepreneurship. If you Google it, they should have a web page on it. Whenever it opens, I'll sort of send it into the various inboxes. But there are.
It's called Exploring Digital Entrepreneurship.
There's a few different things they do. So that sort of thing does still come up, and there are opportunities for that if you keep your ears to
You could try like Prince's Trust and those kind of things. I didn't have that much luck with that, but I was trying all the time. I applied for anything I could get my hands on. You know, I haven't got rich parents or anything like that. It's just whatever I could get. So, just go out and do it.
Yeah, there's like PRS.
PRS, yeah. There's tons of stuff. Yeah.
Lots of competition there, but still.
Yeah, there's Arts Council as well for project funds and stuff as well.
Yeah.
Funds and stuff. Again, lots of competition with the Arts Council.
Then you stand much more chance of actually winning something like that if you're in a position to use it for good. So it's like if you can show that you've already put steps in place to make it a success, then it's a no-brainer, isn't it? Really. But yeah, it's like that's just my journey. Like yours will be totally different. Like I don't know. Like what kind of stuff are you guys like hoping to get into? Like have we got any like budding recording engineers or?
I mostly record singer-songwriter stuff and like blues guitar on top of that. So like the 2006 John Mayer kind of sound.
Yeah. Great. So like pursuing that. So would you like still want to like be quite heavily involved in like songwriting, say?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Great.
That's my favourite part of the process, actually.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, good luck. Cool. But yeah, hopefully, like I say, you take away from it like what you will. It's just one person's like take on it, and there's many routes into like any kind of job but obviously you're sitting here, you essentially music students, you've already made like a conscious decision to go down like quite a competitive, difficult route. So you must already kind of know that the path laid out is not going to be that simple. If you like, it's not very often you just go online and search music jobs and actually get much back. So you're going to have to carve something out for yourselves, The music industry is pretty like gatekeepy when it comes to this kind of stuff. So it's like you've definitely got to go and like kick the door down with this sort of thing. So, but you must already know that through being here. So, yeah, just good luck. Hope it works out. Just don't give up with it if it's something that you really truly want to do. That's all I can say. Really, just be stubborn. Don't listen to people when they say like. When they start handing you application forms for like factory work and stuff, if that's not what you want to do, just keep saying no until it works out. But yeah, cool, thanks very much. I think that was quite long actually. Well, I appreciate your patience, that was quite a slog, wasn't it? But yeah, cheers, thanks so much guys. Anyway, I appreciate it.